Hi, I'm Liam Jeffers, and I would like to introduce you to a LakesideTV Special on social injustice. Many things have come to light in 2020, so we decided to talk about the social injustices on a series of topics, including the face of racism, police shootings, defunding the police, and the death penalty. We show that racism can be shown in many forms by suppressing one's culture and how to open up to the conversation of racism. We hear the story of someone that has dealt with racism and how they help others battle it.
Racism. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that's a minority.
Because of the recent events, I believed it was important to see the point of view many people don't have to see.
Racism can take shape in many forms, like suppressing others' culture, which causes people to become ashamed, instead of being supportive and fighting for a cause. So I decided to sit down with local immigration lawyer Miriam Ramirez to see if she had any insight.
So, yes, it's definitely something that's real, something that happens all the time. But one of the things too, though, is that these last few years, I've been on this journey of discovering myself and being in tune with my roots, my Hispanic Latino roots. Growing up, I was honestly, I'll admit it, I was ashamed of being different. And so I tried to fit in as much as I could. My parents were watching or, listening to Mexican music, watching Mexican, things. I wanted to watch American music, listen to Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys. I wanted to be white. And so I think that mentality kind of made me and put myself under the radar, and kind of get by with not being picked on. And
As we strive to improve conversations about racism and racial injustice, the environment which we are in seems to be constantly shifting, which shows that these conversations are more important than ever. Note that while there are many reasons to communicate with various audiences about racial justice issues, this memo focuses on messaging with the primary goal of persuading them towards action.
I think just reassuring people and just, loving on them. If you do see a situation where it can kind of be rude or get a little bit hostile, step in there and say something. It's those little things that kind of help because, if no one says anything, then it's going to continue to happen. And so if you are ever in a situation where you can use your voice to help someone else, then that's fine, and that's great. And that's what you should do.
There are many times when people need to communicate with their frustration, anger, and pain to the world, to speak truth to power. Doing so may not always be the most persuasive, but it doesn't make it any less important.
Opening conversations with shared values helps emphasize society's role in affording a fair chance to everyone. But starting conversation here does not mean avoiding discussions of race.
If to the non-immigrant or non-Hispanic, non-Latino community, I would definitely recommend, hey, reaching out and putting yourself in situations where, for example, some of our family friends, my parents, we like to have dinner with them. We like to invite them into our home. We like to talk to them about our culture, talk to them about, what we've gone through, how we got to the United States, and having those, that a lot of barriers can be broken over the dinner table. Statistics, the media, all that stuff is just gonna put words, but you need to put a face. And once you get to know someone, you'll truly kind of get a better picture of that. And so in order to help combat racism or prejudice, stereotypes, I think just being open to communicating with with the people that don't look like you.
The idea that racism is largely over or dying out over time is far from the truth. Be kind, be understanding, and be the change you want to see. It can be as simple as a conversation over the dinner table.
What an amazing story. It's sad to hear, but it's true. People's lives can be greatly affected just from the fact that their skin looks a little different. And from this, they oftentimes may feel like an outcast or that they aren't doing something right and would do anything just to feel normal. It's important to try to boost these voices that may not always be heard to allow other people to know that they aren't the only ones dealing with these issues. On this upcoming segment, we sat down with a Black police officer to hear his thoughts on the recent police shootings.
A lot of crazy things has been going on with 2020, for example, with COVID, capital problems, and a lot more. But the main one is police shootings and killing. There have been a lot of police shootings very recently with Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Kurt, Stephen Clark, and even more. They have been very tragic to not only us Black Americans, but in the USA, there have been 995 people shot today, even with all races all over the world. More than 250 people have been fatally shot by police officers in the first 3 months of 2016. Said with the Washington Post database, it says that we Black Americans have a higher risk than white Americans, unarmed and even armed. The rate at which Black Americans are killed by police is more than twice as high of the rate for white Americans. But the most victims that have been killed are young males, and this adds up with all races. So being with that, I had an interview with Blake Loosely that's been in the police department for 10 years, and I interviewed him to ask on his opinions about police shootings and how he feels.
They're never good, first off. And I believe the reason that to be honest with you, they're never going to stop happening. Not because police officers are bad people, it's just, but we've been placed in this category where we have a badge and now that's all we do. So the media is always going to portray the cops as the bad guys, regardless of the situation. Should they happen all the time? No, they shouldn't. Some of them could be avoided, but that comes with training, So it's the lack of training in officers that, for police officers with, people trying to defund the police. Not us. We work for the county, but Austin PD, they're getting defunded. 10 years ago, if I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't be an officer. But it is really hard being an officer in today's society.
Before one of them opens fire. While the sheriff's department claims motel surveillance video shows Reinhold's hand on the weapon, it's not clear.
It's always going to be a camera. There's always going to be negative stuff, For example, yesterday, I had this unsafe inmate. I had this person that I was taking to the hospital. She was a female, so I had a female partner with me, and she started fighting us when she was in the emergency room. As soon as I turned around, there was nurses behind us recording us, just to see what we were gonna do. And so that makes our job, it really does make it hard because, like I said, we're gonna keep doing our job. I tell everybody this: not everybody that wears a badge is good, So I don't want them to fear them. I don't want anybody to fear officers because you guys are supposed to come for us for help. And recently they've gotten away from that because everybody with a badge and a gun, they're bad people. That's not the case. I'm not saying that everybody is good, but I'm not saying everybody is bad. Respect the law enforcement, obey the law, and everything should be good,
Pause the video after he opens the door with his back to an officer. At least 7 shots can be heard.
Why were you shooting my child like that so many times?
Police say they were originally responding to a domestic incident. It's unclear what occurred.
Police officers need to get more involved in communities, as far as, going through little events and not just being security there, but actually engaging with the people. I think that's the only way that people would gain the trust of police again. They have to be involved. And I see that nowadays they don't. If they're at an event, they're getting paid to do security. They're not there to educate. They're not there to, so I keep these little badges with me. They're little stickers, and every time if I pull up to the gas station, I see little kids or something, it's a badge, with Travis County or something on it. And, just make their day, and it starts there, because when kids see you being nice, then, that's where it starts though, in community. So I would tell people, don't turn your back on officers. We are here to help. Like I said, there are some bad apples, but don't let the bad apples spoil it for everybody. Uh, you know, I've been doing this. I haven't been doing it for too long, but I've been doing it long enough to know that, you know, everybody that I've been around, we are here to help. Okay. Um, so with that being said, I mean, just respect the law and don't make us have to do our job.
So even though we may say that Black people have a higher risk, everyone actually has a risk with police shootings, but they are all different in a way.
What a great segment. It's always good to hear another perspective so we can help learn and see other sides of the story. On this next segment, we'll hear the reasoning and the actual meaning of the term defund the police. We'll go over how the phrase isn't as radical as many may think and how it could even benefit you and your community in the long run. We welcome a very special guest on the show today, a professional on the topic of racial and social injustice, Dr. Ray Sean Ray.
Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up!
Last summer was interesting to say the least, from the COVID pandemic to the protests that were in response to George Floyd's death. And from those protests came one phrase that tends to get misrepresented. Defund the police. So what does it even mean? When you ask different people, you tend to get different answers on both sides of the political spectrum, as it can be translated as something as minor and small as police reform to completely abolishing the police entirely. Luckily for you, I brought in an amazing guest who's an expert on the topic, Dr. Ray Sean Ray. Dr. Ray Sean Ray, a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland, is an expert on racial and social injustice that can be found within our society. You may have seen him on networks like C-SPAN, MSNBC, HLN, Al Jazeera, NPR, Fox News, and CNN. So again, what does it mean? And what if I told you that it isn't as radical as it may sound?
So defund the police simply means to reallocate funding away from police budgets to other forms of social services primarily, but other things that the community might need.
The common consensus among professionals and activists is that the goal is to reform and reallocate resources to make the police work in the best interest of the community. On average, states spend up to 40% of their budget on their police force. The goal of defunding the police would simply be to rework that budget. So, what is a way we could rework that budget?
One thing that people don't oftentimes recognize is that police budgets are expansive. So if we look at Chicago, for example, in 2020, their police budget was like $1.8 billion. And in certain places like Oakland, California, police takes up 40% of the entire tax revenue for the city. So for some other places, it might be 15 or 20%. That might be okay. But for the places where it's completely out of whack, I think we have to look at and we have to take a market-driven, evidence-based approach to figure out whether or not some of those funds could be better used in other places that will reduce crime and really empower the community.
The thing is, many police officers would also benefit from this tremendously, as many police officers are asked to do too many things that they just aren't trained for. By reallocating resources, we would be able to have trained social workers, mental health professionals, and crisis interventionist teams that are a part of the local police agency. Another big part of this change would be to decriminalize certain offenses like addiction, or instead of violently locking people up, you can get them the help they need to re-enter society. An example of how this could work could be a situation like a domestic violence call. The police could arrive on the scene, but a part of said police would be a crisis interventionist team and a mental health professional, along with an armed police officer. The crisis team and mental health worker could go into the scene and de-escalate the situation, and if things still go south and the situation gets violent, then the social workers could call for the police officer that would be waiting outside. Sadly, most of the time when an officer gets a call for a situation that deals with mental health, it doesn't go too well, as officers just aren't trained well enough on how to de-escalate a situation.
We know that mental health has been a huge problem over the past couple of decades in particular. I mean, I think pretty much forever, but we're starting to really understand it a little bit better. And police officers respond to a lot of mental health calls. And there are a lot of unfortunate incidents, even more recently in Philadelphia, New York, and other places, of officers responding to mental health calls and only knowing how to actually be aggressive when responding to people instead of having better strategies to de-escalate.
While rethinking the budget is a big part of Defund the Police, another part of police reform is how we actually train our police.
When we compare the United States to other countries, we know that the United States does not do a good job of training officers relative to people in other countries. And this is considering that we are one of the few advanced nations that allow citizens to have access to the weapons that we do.
Even though some police academies can require up to 5 months of training, on average, most police training is only about 13 weeks of academy. To put that into perspective, almost all police officers train less than barbers.
So in that regard, clearly, police officers need to be trained more. I particularly think that funding should be used to send them back to school. There are places that are starting to require 2 years of college or an associate vocational technical degree, or even 4 years to have a bachelor's degree.
Along with better and more extensive training would be holding police officers accountable, as police officers should not get a pass to break the laws that they swear to uphold.
The big thing is qualified immunity leads to officers not facing any sort of civil liability for this, meaning that money comes out of the taxpayer budget on top of the police budget. And I think that if we do a shift in this, when we create police department insurance policies, where a police department has a blanket policy to cover its officers, when someone does something like what we saw in Minneapolis with George Floyd and former officer Derek Chauvin, he wouldn't have even been on the force because he's been costing Minneapolis so much money.
At the end of the day, Defund the Police works to better communities, make police departments better, not abolish them, and end unjust over-policing. I've also haven't even mentioned that with reworking the bloated police budget, we'd also be able to put more money into things like housing, public health, education, homeless shelters, and so much more. Defund the police and police reform as a whole is not a radical idea. It simply aims to make the whole community safer for people like me and you. We often hear so many phrases being thrown around nowadays, but don't always have the time to look into what they actually mean. This results in many phrases and movements becoming over-politicized, and many things that could actually be nonpartisan just to turn into virtue signals that one side shouts to the other with, without many knowing the nuances of what the term may actually mean. It's important to try our best to stay informed and hear all sides of an argument before making an opinion. This way, we can better understand each other and work together to help our communities be the best they can be. In this next segment, we speak about statistics and if they show if there is any unfairness of the death penalty.
The death penalty has been incredibly controversial here in the United States for decades. This type of capital punishment has been persistent since 1976. Now, if you know the Constitution, you might question the death penalty. Does it violate the 8th Amendment and the ban on cruel and unusual punishment? The answer is no. The Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty does not violate the 8th Amendment. 1,491 individuals have been executed by death penalty since 1976. Now let's look at some more recent years. From 2017 to 2020, a total of 83 individuals were executed on death row. However, a steady decline has been made. 32 states have either abolished the death penalty or have not performed an execution in over a decade. A question may be arising: why exactly is the death penalty so controversial? Is it because of the 8th Amendment? Is it because citizens do not want to continue to pay taxes towards this government punishment? Or is it because the death penalty is discriminatory? The death penalty will often target vulnerable individuals, such as those who live in poverty, those who suffer from mental illness, and even those of minority. Let's focus on that argument. Is the death penalty discriminatory? More specifically, does the death penalty have a racial bias towards Black people? In recent years, the criminal justice system has been under fire by the people and the media for displaying racial bias against against people of color. According to the NAACP, 13% of Black people make up the population of the United States. However, 42% of Black people make up the population on death row, and 35% of those people are executed. This is unfortunately a lot of people. According to data provided by the DPIC, 87% of Black people have been wrongly convicted on death row. Comparing this to more data provided by the DPIC, only 67% of white people have been wrongly convicted on death row. Some very recent cases that have made media are Dustin Higgs and Brendan Bernard, two Black men wrongly convicted and executed on death row. Evidently, because of the statistics, it seems probable that the death penalty has a racial bias, but how can this be fixed? Organizations like EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, which is based in Montgomery, Alabama, exclusively helps with Black people who were wrongly convicted on death row. When EJI is talking about the death penalty, they state, "The question we ask about the death penalty in America is not whether someone deserves to die for a crime. The question is whether we deserve to kill." I spoke with law fellow Kayla Vinson, who has been a part of EJI since 2019. I asked her about the death penalty. Does it display racial bias? She states, "If you think about a 10% error rate, if we knew that for every 9 planes that took off, 1 plane would crash and kill everyone on the plane, the government would shut down airlines until it was safe again. When it comes to the punishment our government conducts, the court does not take every precaution, and it is really scary when the government does not follow its own rules." One of the most recent cases EJI conducted was helping Anthony Ray Hinton get off of death row. Vincent states Anthony Ray Hinton was released from Alabama death row in 2015 after serving just shy of 30 years on death row, which, as you may know, means he spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement in a very small cell. And he was sent there for a crime he didn't commit, and that he couldn't possibly have committed, and that the police and prosecutors knew he didn't commit. Anthony now works on behalf of EJI as a community educator. He travels around the country to advocate for the abolishment of the death penalty. To get involved with EJI at a young age, the organization offers a college internship, which is great for upcoming generations who want to enact change. However, everyone who wants to incite change does not have access to voting. I asked Vincent what are some possible ways that they could. She states, "It is harder to ignore large groups of particularly children and young people making demands about the kind of world they want to live in. Protest and the rise of social media are possibly going to be what potentially changes the United States for the better." This video is meant to be unbiased and not to sway any opinions. This video is meant to display facts of the death penalty only.
It's very important to try to visualize the future without a death penalty, and to end the modern reality of the state having a monopoly on violence. It's within our power to change the system for the better, and it's our duty as Americans to exercise this power so that each generation has a greater promise for a better tomorrow. Again, my name's Liam Jeffers, and this has been a Lakeside TV segment on racial and social injustice. 2020 has been a crazy year, but we hope that you can use this experience to learn and grow and do better and to better our communities.